Hi, I'm Brian Bouldrey from Northwestern University, and I'm here to talk today about monastic hospitality and walking the Jacobsweg in Austria's Wachau region. I want to identify myself as one who, among all y'all academics, teaches creative writing and literature. My history here at these conferences has been Ruskinian. I try to quantify the unquantifiable. I've talked about fun, uh, on the Camino de Santiago and how walking helps you think. Now I want to talk about host and guest and how you can't always get what you want, but you can try and get what you need. As I dig into my presentation on the Jacobsweg in Austria's Wachau, I want to back up a little and tell you briefly about walking the Camino de Santiago from Vézelay in 2002. Somewhere along in the Dordogne, I met two pilgrim Franciscan monks, Samuel and Matthias. They were interesting and they were funny, and their French was a lot better than mine. So I depended on them to get my coffee order right each morning. I especially enjoyed the company of Matthias because we both liked Opera and Buffy the Vampire Slayer and stuff like that. Around Osterbat, they had to stop because they had committed to fixing church doors or something brotherly, something to do with making the Camino a place friendly to the pilgrim, because giving hospitality to travelers is a universal blessing. Matthias and I exchanged email addresses, and there were a couple of years of intermittent Christmas greetings and quick hellos, but then we lost touch around 2005, and life does go on. This past summer, on the fourth day of my 8-day pilgrim crossing of the Jacobsweg, the Way of St. James, in Austria's Wachau, a region just northwest of Vienna, I trudged to the doors of a little pilgrim church called Maria Langeg, seen here. Accessible only by trail and a long, rough, unpaved service road through the woods to the cliffy shore along the Danube. I'd made arrangements to stay that night in a cell there, and as I stepped into the church itself to find the caretaker, who should I see but my old friend Matthias? "Brian!" he exclaimed, recognizing me immediately. "Matthias!" I exclaimed right after that. Then, "How have you been?" And he looked around the church, and then he threw his hands in the air and said, "Still a monk." There are worse situations in the world. The Wachau, which is like the Camino de Santiago, a UNESCO World Heritage region, and has the best of both nature and culture, home of the Venus of Willendorf and ancient Roman towns. It's the only place in the entire Nibelungenlied saga where no slaughter broke out. This is also the southern extension of Bohemia, and the Danube is often called the coast of Bohemia. Shakespeare's Winter's Tale occurs in this region, and while a modern pilgrim no longer has to worry about walking through the woods, it is more than once that we think of the great stage direction, exit pursued by bear. Outliving the bears and enduring for 1,000 years are the Benedictines, and their hospitality both grave and jolly, like their abbeys, like the Jacobsweg on the hill, themselves dressed in silly Baroque seriousness. The violin-shaped bulwarks and the scrollwork frames around obscure saints and even more obscure martyrdoms. Castles ruined and kept. A falcon soars over the vineyards, a sort of pattern broadloom that softens the hills. These vineyards grow the grapes for the young white Grüner Veltliner and decorate the sloping tailings of the Tyrol. And beneath them, in the chalky limestone terroir, ancient Roman soldiers wait to be discovered by the plow. My old pilgrim friend Petra, who lives here, organizes citizen scientist gatherings to dust off the skeletons of centurions, and skulls sit around her office like paperweights. While part of the Jacobsweg here is an old Roman road, another part is the Schleichweg, the sneaky way, as they say in German, the road you take home from the vineyard Heurigen pubs like this one, where the police don't watch you swerve drunkenly. I'm walking the region here in while with late summer alders, sunflowers, mollycoddled chestnuts, raspberry bramble, rose hips almost as perfect as candy in their shiny red, nettles and the nettling electric fences that keep deer out of the cornfields. Directional signage ridiculously overdone. And then not enough at all. The Danube is full of trout and boats and is never blue but muddy, but still you can see the reflection of all those onion cupolas on the smaller, splendid village churches. The bells on these churches are insistent, as are the dogs barking at them, rivals in noise-making only bested by thunder. Almost everywhere you stand on the trail, you can see the great Benedictine Abbey, Stiftgottsweg, as if it were God itself, protecting pilgrims and giving them something to look at when not penitentially watching their own feet as they step over the roots and rocks in the trail. About 3 days by foot from Stiftgottsweg is the Abbey of Melk, Benedictine bookends. Melk is high noon in the high Baroque style. The same aesthetic mood informs church and palace and ballroom and monastery, for paradox reconciles all contradictions. There is in this rococo the interplay of spiritual and temporal. The ceilings are painted with banked cotton candy Tiepolo clouds holding saints and putti, and the pilgrim needs to stop the vertigo by returning the gaze to their feet on the chessboard floors. Patrick Leigh Fermor, the great backpacking travel writer, who writes best when he is drunk, of writing about drinkers, or finds himself in an intimidating landscape, was doing all three when he wrote about the Jacobsweg and his arrival at Stiftgottsweg and the Wachau in 1933's A Time of Gifts. It is, in fact, played as the climax to his 3-foot journey across the mountainous spine of Europe. Quote, "The footpath along the southern bank was leading me into the heart of the Wachau, a region of the Danube as famous as those stretches of the Rhine and Loire. Melk was a threshold of this unspeakably beautiful valley. Castles beyond counting had been looming along the river. They were pitched on dizzier spurs here, more dramatic in decay and more mysteriously covered with fable. The towered headlands dropped sheer, the liquid arcs flowed around them in semicircles. From ruins further from the shore, the land sloped more gently, and vineyards and orchards descended in layers to the tree-reflecting banks. If any landscape is the meeting place of chivalrous romance and fairy tales, it is this. I sat under a birch tree to sketch Schloss Schönbrunn, gleaming as were a carved ivory. It sprang out of a pivot of rock which the river almost surrounded, and ended in a single and immense tall white tower crowned with an onion cupola." Unquote. I too sat under a birch to sketch Schönbrunn, and by sketch I mean snap a photo, and order another glass of wine. It was the only place in my 8-day journey where it was more convenient to pitch my tent at the river's edge for the night, but the view of the castle made me imagine myself in the swankiest of hotels. Fermor then goes on to say that he simply ran into a Benedictine monk, who immediately assumed the role of host for the writer. Quote, "No janitor was about. A young Benedictine, finding me loitering in the gatehouse, took me in tow, and as we crossed the first great courtyard, I knew I was in luck. He spoke beautiful French. They always do. He was learned and amusing and the ideal cicerone for all that lay ahead. The monk, quote, was a companion transformed as well. Habit, scapular, cowl, and tonsure had all vanished, and a powdered queue uncoiled down his brocaded back from a bow of watered silk. He was a Mozartian courtier." St. Benedict seemed to have expected that many different people would come to the monastery. He even placed a porter at the monastery's entrance to make sure that visitors would always be recognized and greeted. St. Benedict took special care that the poor be noticed as guests. Listen to what he says in his own writing. "As soon as anyone knocks or a poor man calls out, he, the porter, replies, 'Thanks be to God,' or 'Your blessing, please.' Then, with all the gentleness that comes from the fear of God, he provides a prompt answer with the warmth of love. Besides the poor, Benedict is also very solicitous of travelers or pilgrims. Quote, 'Great care and concern are to be shown in receiving poor pilgrims and and people, because in them, more particularly, Christ is received. Hospitality is provided not only on the form of food, the abbot's table must always be with guests and travelers, but lodging as well, since St. Benedict, speaking of the guest house, says that adequate bedding should be available there. These ideas are 15 centuries old and fresh as a daisy in my mind. St. Benedict can be credited with laying down the laws of hospitality, the enduring effort to quantify warmth and kindness. How is the spirit of hospitality defined, and by whom? There is among all the religions and throughout history a blessing on hospitality. Beware of visiting angels, says the Bible. Today, many churches are wrestling with the concept of radical hospitality, taking in any person who comes there in need of shelter and on their own terms, the homeless, the mentally ill, the refugee, the addict. To accept all comers is harder for the refuges of the world than others, for some refuges of the world than others. Benedict builds into his hospitality the notion that we offer shelter so that the traveler can get on with their journey as soon as possible. This is not a bum's rush, but a specific goal of both traveler and host. So what refreshes the traveler? Without belaboring the subject, it is in firmer sentences that describes the ideal host, one who flings wide the doors, makes the traveler comfortable, brings out something to eat and drink, and whiles away the evening with the gift of the gab. In Ovid's touching tale being a rarity in the Metamorphoses of Baucis and Philemon, that Jupiter and Mercury dress themselves as traveling mortals on a village, walking in a village for hospitality. Door after door is shut in their faces until they come to a very poor but brightly lit hovel. Quoting the Alan Mandelbaum translation, the story goes, "And in that hut there lived an aged woman, the pious Baucis, and with her Philemon, as old as she was. They were wed when young within that hut, and there they had grown old, serene in poverty, not seeing poverty as stain or tarnish, something to be hid. And when the two gods from the sky arrived, they stooped on entering. The door was low. The old man, setting out a bench on which his Baucis had been quick to spread rough cloth, invited them to sit, to rest their limbs. She cuts up greens, he cuts up smoked pork, and they put it in the pot to cook. Quote, and they beguiled their waiting time with talk. Unquote. Olives, berries, cherries, pickled fruits, and wine, a modest feast, but a feast nonetheless. And to all these, Ovid continues, are added liveliness, good cheer, kind faces, willing and generous. Quote, unquote. It is this, the whiling away the time with talk, and the willingness and good cheer, that really makes the visit a happy one for the gods. When Baucis and Philemon offer to kill their only goose to make the party go further, Jupiter reveals himself to them. Their hovel becomes a temple to their guest, while the rest of the village sinks into the swamp. That's what happens when you're a bad host. In both the abbeys of the scenes in the Wachau and in the modest pilgrim church where Brother Matthias took in the guests at Maria Langeg, it is the beguilement of the waiting time that is the most pleasant for this pilgrim. It is the art of conversation. The Latin original of they beguiled their waiting time with talk is interia medias falunt sermonibus horas. Literally, meanwhile, they deceived the hours with talk. Later, when they become even older but priests of Jupiter, Ovid tells us they were, quote, weary with their long years, and one day, as they were standing near these sacred steps, recounting time gone by, they start turning into trees. Recounting times. They were deceiving the hours right up to the last moment of their human life. It doesn't have to be important talk. A pilgrim does not need a acceptance speech. What we are often looking for in a host is the art of, well, shooting the bull. Here is a very short list of kinds of bull shoot. Alibis, dirty and non-dirty limericks, but especially dirty limericks, camp, shaggy dog stories, legal pleadings, tiny pranks, hearsay, bluffing at cards, gross out songs about boogers and Batman smelling, boast poems, whistling in the dark, idle threats, Martin Sheen's winning manifesto, rumor mongering, embellishment, close-up table magic, those filthy prophets standing on boxes making prophecies up in the life of Brian, the dozens, your college application essay, hazy memories from a bar in your youth, most tweets, talking the police out of a ticket, tall tales, trash talk, the one that got away fish stories, myths, and academic talks. Burn. William Carlos Williams in Asphodel, that flower, praised this beguilement of the hours in his own way with, "You do not get far with silence. Begin again. It is like Homer's catalogue of ships. It fills up the time. Conversation, hospitality, these are the things to fill the time and help divide the day from endless night. The truth is, both host and pilgrim know that a pilgrim wants very little. A simple meal, maybe a shower, a place to unroll a sleeping bag, and a line to hang some wet laundry. The rest, the beguiling of the hours, is a luxury." So there I was in that isolated church, Maria Langeg, the only visitor Matthias had had in a week, there in the forest above the Danube. He rolled out the modest meal for me the way Baucis and Philemon did for Jupiter and Mercury, took some stale bread and steamed it into delicious knödel with a hearty soup and a shared hunk of pork, a bottle of the Gruner Veltliner saved for a special occasion, and desperately or drunkenly a misshapen power bar from the bottom of my backpack for dessert. And we talked and joked and shot the bull till the wee hours. I hardly remember that my narrow mattress was lumpy that night. This is what it is to receive the very good spirit of hospitality. Thank you.